You already heard Merle Paula use the phrase the agentic state. So I'm going to try and unpack that for you a little bit and start this process of really rethinking how government might work in this era of agentic AI. Also, a little bit of a plug, you're getting a sneak peek of something that we're going to be launching tomorrow on the main stage of the Tallinn Digital Summit. So you kind of get the preview version. Let's start, first of all, by defining terms. I think this audience probably knows what agentic AI is, but let's simplify it and dumb it down. It's really taking two big technological sort of blocks of technology and putting them together. So what we call the brain. So that's, in particular, LLMs, generative AI, but more generally, what we can now do with different kinds of learning models, including models you may have in the future, like world models, and applying that intelligence to the hands, to tool use, to workflows, to APIs, to all the software that we've been building over the last couple of decades. And together, this allows us to create software that perceives, that reasons, and that acts in ways that are not identical, but similar to how humans reason, perceive, and act, at least in specific, well-defined tasks, to achieve defined outcomes, often with relatively little human intervention. And now this is really important if you're a government, because if we think about what government is, what it does, it's basically a bundle of workflows. Benefit claims, procurement, HR, licensing, rulemaking. And these workflows today are pretty slow, reactive, episodic, and let's be frank, they move at the speed of humans, of bureaucrats, which is slower than your regular human. And it takes a form of forms and audits and annual updates and procedures and so on. And that leads to all the sort of problems, all of the ways in which today we're not satisfied with our governments. And so it's obvious that if we apply agentic AI, we have the potential to make a really big change here. But it's important to move beyond the hype to get a little bit more analytical about what we're actually doing. And so to give you something of an analytical framework to think about this, it's useful to think about what we're now doing with agentic AI as not something entirely new, but another step or several steps in a process that we've actually been engaged in for years, for decades, around automation. So there have been in the last couple of years a whole bunch of different models around thinking of layers of automation. From, in this case, level 0, which is humans without any kind of automation, to level 5, which is sort of the sci-fi of artificial general intelligence that doesn't actually exist anywhere. And the easiest way to explain this, that pretty much everyone's familiar with, is actually applying this model to cars. So level 0 of automation is sort of the way we're used to using a car back in the 1980s or 90s. And then you've got simple rule-based automation, so basic cruise control. You push a button, the car does something, you can adjust it, but it just reacts in a deterministic way to human input. Now, what we've been doing with machine learning for the last decade is level 2 here, so intelligent process automation, putting already some non-deterministic automation here, so that might be dynamic cruise control, lane holding. And what now agents are letting us do is go to levels 3 and 4. So agentic workflows, where the actual main task is being done by the machine and the human handles the edge cases. So a lot of cars today have some kind of auto nav on the highway. It'll basically drive the car for you, and then it'll ping you or wake you up if you need to take over. And then level 4, which is really the self-driving cars we have today. So you go to Phoenix or you go to San Francisco, you get in a Waymo, in the bounded environment of that city, where, by the way, they've done a whole lot of training the cars to work in those cities specifically, it can actually drive itself. Now, to be very clear, what no self-driving car today can do is drive truly, fully autonomously any environment unprepared on planet Earth in the way that a human, a decently competent driver can today. So we're not there yet. But basically with these capabilities we've developed in the last couple of years, we can suddenly leap from level 2 to levels 3 and 4. And this, of course, is pretty meaningful to government. Because we can go from level 0, which is sort of the baseline of where governments work before tech. And levels 1 and 2 is really what the world's best digital governments have been doing for a decade or two. So what Estonia is really good at today is rule-based automation and some amount of intelligent process automation. So all the stuff you do over X-Road with identity, all the automated services, it's mostly still rule-based automation. And there's some intelligent process automation. We've been doing a whole lot with AI and machine learning in Estonia, like many other countries have since the middle or the end of the last decade. But now we're starting to have the technological capability to move from there into agentic workflows and building semi-autonomous agents. So the difference between level 2 automation is that you still have, you might have a recommendation from a machine, but the human is still actually making the decisions on the process. You can go into situations where all of the routine cases are handled end-to-end, and humans really just handle the edge cases. And even you start giving more and more complex processes at level 4 to the agents, and the humans deal more with the overall setup of that process and managing the process of parameters. Now, what we can't do today, and probably won't be able to do for a while, is to hand an entire policy area to the AI and say, okay, you run social everything. You know what? Don't just do the benefits claims, adjust the social policy, steer it all. That's going to require humans for a while. But there's a huge amount of value to be gained at levels 3 and 4. And to think about that in a less abstract way, we can talk about some of the KPIs of good government. And these numbers here, these are not abstract or theoretical. These are KPIs that governments today, in particular Estonia, Ukraine, but some others, are actually working towards and what they hope to achieve in the next couple of years through the very ambitious use of AI agents in their infrastructure and their services. So, first of all, the time to completion for basically any service, any interaction with government, why not do it in less than a minute? That's basically a measure of how well have you actually automated. But also the task of launching new services, which normally takes months or even years. We already know in Ukraine that just by being faster and more agile and leveraging interoperability, you can get that down to weeks, and in some cases even days. They've had to do that a lot in Ukraine in the last 3 years. But why not bring that down to a day? If I can tell an agent connected to an MCP server talking with other agents what it should be accomplishing, I can have that not just up and running, but tested, validated in a day. And that, of course, should allow us faster services, more agile services to push up user satisfaction into the territory where the best private companies are today, and to resolve the vast majority of user needs, citizens, businesses' needs, without having to wait for human interaction. Now, to get there, we're not just talking about slapping technology on top of government. It is going to require a very thorough, deep re-engineering of the processes of how government works. And this is what we're calling the agentic state. Government that has really been redesigned to take advantage of these capabilities that technology now offers us. And to break that down again into something that's a little bit more specific and analytical, we talk about 6 layers or 6 public functions that really are going to be changed in a fundamental way by agents, and then 6 layers of enabling those. So let me talk about the 6 we see on the top first, because these are basically going to be areas where the capabilities of AI agents are going to allow government in the coming years to function at an entirely different level. The first obvious one is the user experience, right? This isn't just chatbots. This is multimodal interaction that really meets the user wherever they are, and that could be a government agent, so that could be a government chatbot that will speak to you in any language, that will show up in your VR glasses, but it could also be allowing you, with the agent you have on your smartphone, to consume public services natively without having to go through a website. The second big area, of course, is the internal workflows of government. I mean, government is going to be going through a lot of internal transformation like any enterprise is. So the ways that HR processes work, budgeting work, to the extent that any company can do it, government can do it too. But then there's also in these areas, the transition is going to look similar to what's going to happen in enterprise. We're going to see really big changes in user experience in enterprise, really big changes under the hood in the back office in the next couple of years. Huge gains in efficiency, increases in user satisfaction. But it's also we're saying that there are unique functions of government where agents are also going to make a huge difference. So the first 2 are policy and rulemaking, and then also regulatory compliance and supervision, where these are very slow manual processes today. They're fundamentally broken. Making regulatory rules takes weeks and months, really undynamic process. And then, of course, if you've ever been in a company that has to comply with a lot of regulation, you know how much pain that is, what the overhead, several % of GDP at a systematic level is. All of these workflows can be rebuilt from the ground up. So we can imagine, for instance, compliance done with compliance agents sitting inside the information systems of companies, basically generating real-time live updates based on all the data in the company's enterprise systems on whether they're compliant with environmental rules or cybersecurity rules. And just for the government producing a nice red light, yellow light, green light, without having to share all the sensitive internal data requiring huge amounts of reporting. Crisis response. Government is the insurer of last resort. It's who we all turn to when the unexpected happens. The very definition of government is the party that steps in when you have force majeure. The ability to react quickly, to set up new services quickly, or just to, at machine speed, understand what's going on and start preparing resources, taking action before complex human organizations have mobilized themselves is going to be critical for national defense and security and terrorism, but equally well for dealing with climate disasters, for pandemics, for many of the challenges that governments face. And finally, something that's very specific, but actually very meaningful in the scope of the problem is public procurement. 10% of global GDP, a broken process today, broken for perfectly good reasons. We have lots of rules and regulations around it, but we can replace human buying with agentic buying in a way that will deliver much more public value. I can't, and I'd love to talk about this for 2 hours, but I'd be kicked off the stage. What I want to finish on is to make these things happen, to create these capabilities for government, there's a lot we're also going to have to get right on the enablement layer. Obviously, how we do accountability, safety, and redress with these fairly autonomous intelligences, but also things that we've been having to do in digital government for a while, data governance, technology, cybersecurity, how we actually buy the agents themselves, and ultimately the change management and the humans that have to work with these agents. These are all going to be complex changes that our governments will need to go through in the coming years to make this possible. And to talk about this, to give you some sense of what's ahead, a positive sense of the vision, but also some practical tips and tricks on the challenges, we've put together a vision paper that's going to launch officially tomorrow, but it's actually up already, so you can read it tonight. And basically, along with a few co-authors from a couple of countries, including Ott Velsberg, who's Estonia's chief AI officer, we've also gathered input from current and former government CIOs and ministers from more than 10 of the world's leading digital governments to put together this coherent vision of what an agentic state could look like, and what it is that all governments are going to need to start doing to get there. And I think what's really exciting for me about this is that we actually have so many leaders in government across the world who are here already, who are in this discussion now. And I think what's at stake is that, in the last couple of decades, government has been years behind enterprise, never mind startups. And the cost of that has been measured in a few percentage points of GDP for those governments that aren't efficient. But I think what's at stake today is higher. If our governments today remain as behind the curve technologically as they've been for the last couple of decades, the cost will be state collapse and failure. And so I think to avoid that, to have states that can actually deliver public goods for their citizens, that can create good business environments for their companies and keep up with the challenges that we face, we're going to need this reinvention. As a very practical point, if you're at the Tallinn Digital Summit, we're going to hold a workshop on Friday to talk about how we start doing this collaboratively, governments and businesses together. But regardless, we'd love to talk to you about how we could collaborate on this, so reach out to us. It's a really exciting time to be in any industry, because I think pretty much every industry is going to get rebuilt from the ground up in the next decade, and government's going to be no different. Thank you.